Welcome to our dark world, where we delve into the twisted depths of the human psyche and uncover terrifying secrets. Today, we journey into the realms of crime and evil through two true stories of the most infamous serial killers in history. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the notorious American murderer who spread terror with his heinous crimes, and the story of Henri Landru, the Frenchman who preyed on grief and weakness to trap his victims. If you're a fan of chilling tales and mysteries, don't forget to support us by subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell so you never miss an update. Now let's begin our journey into the shadows of crime. Jeffrey Dahmer is considered one of the most infamous male serial killers in the world and one of the youngest criminal legends in America. Signs of his criminal tendencies began in his childhood, influenced by family issues, numerous psychological disorders, his addiction to deviant sexual practices and alcohol, and his habit of mutilating animal corpses with his father's assistance. These factors played a role in shaping the personality of one of the most brutal and youngest serial killers in history. Dahmer killed 17 male victims, children, teenagers, and young adults, in unimaginably horrific ways between 1978 and 1991. Numerous books, documentaries, and films have been made about him, the latest being the Netflix series Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, released earlier this month. However, it has been reported that the series did not fully adhere to the truth regarding the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, the infamous American serial killer, began his criminal tendencies during childhood. Born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA on May 21, 1960, Dahmer was the son of Joyce Dahmer, a Norwegian-Irish woman who worked as a teletype instructor, and Lionel Dahmer, a German-Welsh man who was a chemical researcher at Marquette University. Jeffrey Dahmer, who suffered from several psychological disorders such as borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and psychotic disorder, was nevertheless deemed fully competent during his trial, the details of which will be revealed in the following sections of his story. Dahmer endured significant neglect from an early age. His father was often absent due to work commitments, while his mother, struggling with severe depression, attempted to take her own life but survived. Her struggles eventually led to infidelity, causing an amicable divorce between Dahmer's parents. Jeffrey and his younger brother were aware of the separation, and his father remarried. Little is known about his mother's later life, except that she passed away in early 2000. As a child, Jeffrey Dahmer became addicted to alcohol and beer. When one of his elementary school teachers found him drinking near the school, he justified his behavior by claiming that he was dealing with significant family problems. Dahmer explained that he had been an active child but became unusually quiet after undergoing hernia surgery shortly before his 4th birthday. This change left him with few friends and poor academic performance. Despite these difficulties, not all aspects of his childhood were bleak. His father shared a special moment with him by involving him in naming his younger brother, David. Dahmer's obsession with dissecting and manipulating remains began shockingly early, at just 4 years old. He experienced an unusual thrill when he saw his father removing animal bones from beneath their home. The sound of the bones fascinated him, and he became addicted to exploring them, often searching for additional bones under the house. As his family moved to more than 6 different homes across various cities during this period, Dahmer's dark interests only grew. He started collecting large insects like dragonflies and small animal skeletons, such as squirrels, preserving them in the dangerous chemical formaldehyde and storing them in a shed. Strangely, his father was pleased with these activities, believing them to be a sign of scientific curiosity. However, the reality was far more disturbing. In 1975, Dahmer escalated his behavior by decapitating a dog, hanging its body from a tree, and placing the skull on a stick in the woods behind his house. He even invited a friend to see the display, pretending it was a random discovery of animal remains. This chilling incident foreshadowed the horrifying acts that would later make him one of the world's most infamous serial killers. Amid the absence of his mother, who frequently lost consciousness due to her addiction to sleeping pills and other substances, Jeffrey Dahmer, once a tennis player and an average student, turned to alcohol addiction. His dependence on alcohol persisted until his arrest in his early 20s. During adolescence, Dahmer discovered he was gay, though he never disclosed this to his parents. Over time, this led to deviant behavior with multiple individuals, including his victims. He would lure them by pretending to share alcohol with them, or offering money in exchange for taking nude photos. Most of these acts took place in his grandmother's house, the only person in his life toward whom he felt any genuine affection. However, she eventually expelled him from her home after suspecting his behavior, noticing his late-night visitors, and detecting a foul smell, which he did not realize was the odor of the decomposing bodies of his victims, most of whom were gay men. Jeffrey Dahmer's first victim. Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder on June 18, 1978, shortly after graduating from high school. His victim was a young man named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was about 19 years old. Dahmer lured Hicks to his house under the pretense of drinking alcohol. After a night of drinking and listening to music, Dahmer struck Hicks twice on the head with a dumbbell while they were sitting on a chair. He then stripped him of his clothes, performed obscene acts with the corpse, dismembered it, and mutilated the body in the basement. After being expelled from both university and the military 2 years later due to his alcohol addiction, Dahmer worked several jobs. However, he was repeatedly fired, either for falsifying his credentials as a doctor or supervisor, or for his lewd public behavior and persistent drinking. This led him to live alone for a short period before returning to live with his grandmother. One of Jeffrey Dahmer's most notable methods for luring his 17 victims to their deaths was by spiking their alcoholic drinks with sedatives, allowing him to kill them and mutilate their bodies. Driven by his obsession with killing, Dahmer once attempted to dig up the grave of an 18-year-old teenager after reading about him in a newspaper, but he failed as the soil of the grave was too solid. On another occasion, Dahmer claimed he had no recollection of killing a 25-year-old man. He said he was surprised to find the man's corpse under his bed and insisted he had not intended to kill him nor remembered any details. Dahmer bought a large bag to transport the body to his grandmother's house, where he dismembered it, boiled parts of it, and kept some sexual organs preserved in jars. After moving to apartment 213 in Oxford in May 1990, Dahmer went on to kill 12 of his victims there, escalating his gruesome practices by mutilating their bodies even in the bathroom. However, due to his admiration for one of his victims, Thomas, he only killed him without desecrating the body. Following Thomas's murder, Dahmer refrained from killing anyone for 5 months. The world's most notorious serial killer, Jeffrey Dahmer, was eventually caught after neighbors grew suspicious of the foul odors emanating from his apartment and the sounds of a saw he used to dismember his victims. When confronted, Dahmer explained the smells as the result of spoiled food in his old refrigerator and the death of some pet fish he hadn't disposed of. Reassured by his explanation, the neighbors believed him. However, Dahmer's crimes were exposed when his final intended victim, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards, managed to escape. Pretending to cooperate with Dahmer's demands, Edwards convinced him to release the handcuffs and move the knife away. Once free, Edwards struck Dahmer, fled the apartment, and alerted the police. Edwards then led the officers back to Dahmer's apartment, where they arrested him. Starting in the early hours of July 23, 1991, Dahmer was interrogated by Detective Patrick Kennedy for more than 60 hours regarding the murders and the evidence found in his apartment. During the questioning, Dahmer confessed to killing 16 young men in Wisconsin since 1987, as well as another victim, Stephen Hicks, in Ohio in 1978. His trial began on January 30, 1992 in Milwaukee, where he faced 15 charges of first-degree murder before Judge Lawrence Graham. After the 75-minute closing argument by the defense attorney, prosecutor Michael McCann delivered the prosecution's closing statement, describing Jeffrey Dahmer as a sane man fully in control of his actions. Dahmer was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 10 years for the first 2 charges. For the remaining 13 charges, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with an additional mandatory 70 years. The death penalty was not an option for the judge, as Wisconsin had abolished capital punishment in 1853. Following the sentencing, the infamous serial killer remarked, "I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve every bit of the punishment for what I've done." Before being transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Jeffrey Dahmer's father, Lionel, and his stepmother, Shari, requested a private 10-minute meeting to exchange hugs. During his first year in prison, Dahmer was placed in solitary confinement due to concerns about his safety if he interacted with other inmates. He was later moved to a less secure unit, where he was assigned a daily 2-hour task of cleaning toilets. Shortly after completing his lengthy confessions in 1991, Dahmer requested a copy of the Bible from Detective Murphy. On July 3, 1994, another inmate attempted to slash Dahmer's throat with a razor blade, causing only superficial injuries. However, on the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer was pronounced dead 1 hour after being transported to the hospital following an altercation with a fellow inmate who attacked him with a metal rod. In accordance with his wishes, Dahmer's body was cremated in September 1995, and his ashes were divided between his parents. We will tell you the story of Henri Landru, the serial killer who preyed on the grief of Parisian women mourning the loss of their husbands. Henri Landru, often referred to as the Bluebeard, is considered one of the most notorious serial killers in modern French history. He targeted the widows of Paris, exploiting their loneliness and sorrow after losing their husbands during World War I. Although Landru was suspected of luring 283 widows and linked to the disappearance of a significant number of them, he was convicted of only 11 murders. The police struggled to find the bodies of his victims, with forensic evidence limited to bone fragments buried under leaves and burned fabric. Until his execution, Landru insisted on his innocence, mocking the judge and the victims' families in court. He famously declared, "My only regret is that I have but one head to offer." And so ends the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most terrifying and controversial serial killers in modern history. His tale highlights the darkest corners of human nature and how psychological disorders and familial circumstances can shape a monster capable of spreading fear throughout society. Dahmer left behind a legacy of pain and horror, turning the lives of his victims and their families into an unforgettable nightmare. However, his history serves as a grim lesson, reminding us to never overlook the early signs of psychological distress and the danger lurking behind seemingly ordinary faces. Welcome to an exceptional episode where we unravel the chilling story of one of history's most enigmatic criminals. Today we explore the life of Henri Landru, infamously known as the Bluebeard of France. Landru exploited the turmoil of post-war Europe, using charm and deception to lure grieving widows into his sinister web of lies, betrayal, and murder. In this episode, we'll uncover how Landru's calculated intelligence and manipulative charisma turned him into one of the most notorious figures in French criminal history. Prepare for a journey into the darker corners of humanity, where evil hides behind a polished facade. Henri Désiré Landru was born on April 12, 1869, in the French capital, Paris. He had a happy childhood within a family that consisted of his father, who worked as a driver, his mother, a seamstress, and his elder sister. During his primary education, Landru was a diligent student, particularly excelling in drawing and mathematics, where his talents were most evident. From a young age, Landru showed an inclination toward religion. He spent a significant amount of time serving at the altar of the Saint-Louis-en-l'Île church on the Seine River in Paris, where his family lived. Occasionally, he also worked as a minor deacon, prompting his parents to consider enrolling him in a theological seminary. However, Henri Landru did not enter the seminary. Instead, he continued his secondary education in a conventional manner, but failed to complete his higher studies at the School of Architecture. Upon entering the workforce in 1889, he took up a position as an architectural draftsman in engineering offices in Paris. That same year, Henri Désiré Landru met Marie-Catherine Remy. However, their marriage was postponed until the end of his military service. He spent 3 years with the 87th Infantry Battalion in northern France, from which he graduated with the rank of sergeant. On October 7, 1893, Henri Landru was officially married. Between then and the year 1900, he moved between various professions, such as accountant, commercial clerk, and cartographer, among others, changing his workplace approximately 15 times. During this period, his small family grew, and he became the father of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. Instead of improving his work conditions to meet the financial demands of his family, Henri Landru turned to quick profits by deceiving people. In need of quick profits, Henri Landru devised a scheme to establish a fictitious workshop for manufacturing petroleum-powered bicycles. To promote his venture, he launched a large advertising campaign requiring that all orders be accompanied by a down payment amounting to 1/3 of the bicycle's price. Orders poured in from all over France, but not a single bicycle was ever produced. Landru collected the advance payments and disappeared without a trace. This scheme marked the beginning of a long series of fraudulent activities, during which Landru used various aliases. However, his actions eventually caught up with him, resulting in 2 years of imprisonment from 1904 to 1906, followed by an additional 13 months later that same year. Despite being married and sentenced in absentia to 3 years in prison, Landru in 1909 became engaged to a woman named Jeanne Izor, whom he met through a matrimonial advertisement. He convinced her to transfer her assets to him before disappearing without a trace. For this crime, he was sentenced in absentia to 4 years of imprisonment with deportation to French Guiana, a colony in South America notorious for its horrifying prison conditions. By 1914, Landru decided to disappear completely, altering his appearance by allowing his mustache and beard to grow thickly in an attempt to obscure his facial features. To ensure a steady income, he continued his fraudulent activities, this time adopting more violent and sinister methods. Landru posed as a wealthy, lonely widower and targeted widows who had modest savings and lived relatively isolated lives. The ongoing First World War played into his hands, increasing the number of widows left vulnerable after losing their husbands. Using the same ploy, he promised marriage to his victims and invited them to live with him in a secluded villa that he rented specifically to carry out his gruesome plans. According to the newspaper Sud-Ouest, Henri Landru's first crime occurred in December 1914 when he murdered widow Jeanne Couchet, 39 years old, and her young son after meeting her in the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. This marked the beginning of a series of crimes that turned Landru into a notorious serial killer, preying exclusively on widows. Among his victims were Thérèse Laborde-Line, 46 years old, and Désirée Guillain, 52 years old. Thanks to his eloquence and exceptional persuasive abilities, Landru managed to secure exclusive power of attorney over his victims' bank accounts before killing them. He then disposed of their bodies by incinerating them in the oven of the rented villa where he committed his crimes. Many of Henri Landru's other victims were women he met through marriage advertisements in daily newspapers. Meanwhile, he periodically returned to his wife and children, who believed he was working as a traveling salesman. After 4 years of evasion and deceit, Henri Landru's trail was uncovered toward the end of 1918 when the mayor of Gambès, a small town near Paris, received a letter from a woman named Bilotte. She was inquiring about her friend Anna Colombe, a 44-year-old widow who was engaged to a man named Dupont and living with him in Gambès. Not long afterward, the mayor received another letter, this time from a woman named Lacoste, asking about her sister Célestine Buisson, also a 44-year-old widow who had settled in Gambès with a man named Fremiet. The striking similarity in the content of the two letters aroused the mayor's suspicion. He connected the two families, who soon realized that Dupont and Fremiet might be the same person. Both missing women had responded to marriage advertisements published in 1915 in 2 different newspapers. The families decided to file a joint complaint against an unknown individual with the prosecutor's office in the Seine district. The investigation, led by Inspector Jules Bellin, revealed that the villa in question was owned by a man named Mr. Trick, who had rented it to a Mr. Fremiet residing in the city of Rouen. However, Mr. Fremiet, or Dupont, could not be found in Rouen. It was discovered that his mail was being forwarded to a man named Gillet, residing on Neuve Street in Paris, the same address where the missing Célestine Buisson had lived. The evidence was becoming clear, and the only task remaining was to locate and arrest the suspect. The investigation progressed slowly until a significant breakthrough occurred. On April 8, 1919, a neighbor of Miss Lacoste, the sister of the missing Célestine, recognized a strange man she had previously seen with Célestine. This time, however, the man was with another woman, leaving a pottery store in Paris. Inspector Jules Bellin was promptly notified, and he managed to locate and arrest the suspect at his home on April 12, 1919. At the time of his arrest, Henri Landru was using the alias Lucien Gillet, but the police quickly identified his true identity. In his home, they found a scientific certificate bearing his real name and a small notebook listing 11 names, including those of the 2 missing women. Over time, as investigations progressed, the horrific methods used by Henri Landru against his victims came to light. Investigators confirmed that he burned the bodies of his victims after discovering more than 4 kilograms of charred bones inside the villa he had rented. They also found remnants of his victims, such as hairpins, corset fragments, and partially burned buttons. Henri Landru's trial began on November 7, 1921 in Versailles. According to GEO, the trial captivated the French public, with the press extensively covering it since his arrest. The trial lasted 3 weeks, during which Landru steadfastly refused to confess to the murders he was accused of. On December 1, 1921, he was convicted of killing 10 women and 1 child. He was sentenced to death by guillotine, and the sentence was carried out on February 25, 1922, in the square outside Versailles prison. Despite his crimes, Landru garnered some favorable attention from certain newspapers. One paper even wrote, "Listening to him defend himself, Landru seems as innocent as a newborn lamb." Other outlets speculated that the case might have been fabricated by the French government to distract the public from the peace talks held in 1919. In his book, Landru's Secret, British author Richard Tomlinson delves into details that remained hidden for decades about Henri Landru's case. Published in 2018, the book portrays Landru as a misogynistic serial killer and sheds light on various overlooked aspects of the trial. Tomlinson also discusses the presiding judge's dismissive attitude toward Landru's murdered fiancées, whom he described as naive, weak, and foolish. The book highlights the perseverance of the victims' families, who fought tirelessly to ensure the killer was brought to justice. More than a century after Landru committed his first crime, the book examines societal attitudes of the time, particularly the tendency to blame victims for the violence inflicted upon them. Tomlinson's research draws on over 5,000 pages of original case files, including witness statements, police reports, and personal correspondence. For the first time, the book provides a detailed account of how Landru lured, deceived, and ultimately murdered his victims. And with that, we reach the end of the stories of Jeffrey Dahmer and Henri Landru, 2 tales that reveal the darkest aspects of human nature when morality is cast aside and the abyss of crime and horror takes over. Between Dahmer's brutality and Landru's cold-blooded cunning, we witness how psychological disorders and societal factors can shape legendary criminals who leave behind a legacy of pain and fear. These stories are not just chilling narratives, but also serve as lessons, reminding us of the dangers of ignoring warning signs and the destructive impact of psychological turmoil in complex familial circumstances. If these stories intrigued you, don't forget to support us by subscribing to the channel and activating the notification bell. We promise more tales that uncover the dark side of the world we live in. See you soon with another story.